What had they been thinking taking the back roads route? It may have been faster to begin with, but it sure wasn't paying off now. Joseph was beating himself up over what an irresponsible choice he'd made. The baby wasn't even here yet, and already he was proving to be an inadequate father. Since learning about the pregnancy and making the choice to support Mary, things had moved quickly. They'd had a small private wedding ceremony and found a small apartment to move into. Space was tight, but they were doing the best they could given the unexpected circumstances. It had only been about a month that they'd been living together, and tensions were running a little high. Joseph spent every day worrying about raising this baby. It was obvious why God had chosen Mary, given she was the most amazing person Joseph had ever met, but he was pretty sure he was an afterthought. He certainly didn't feel up to the task of raising a baby who was supposed to one day save the world. There's a lot of pressure there to not screw things up. And yet here they were, walking along some back road while Mary's in excruciating pain, trying not to have a baby on the side of the road. He was failing already. If they didn't find cell phone service soon, or even a house with occupants other than rodents, he was afraid the baby would be born without adequate medical help. And what if something went wrong? He was trying to stay calm for Mary's sake, but inside he was in a panic. They had to have walked a few miles by now, and there was nothing, no one, not even a single car had driven past. They passed the sign pointing them to Bethlehem, so he knew civilization couldn't be too far away. But when you're on foot, stopping every 2 to 3 minutes, it's pretty slow going. He couldn't believe there were still places that were so desolate. Where were all the housing developments, the businesses, the gas stations? It seemed everywhere back home was bustling with progress, and yet here there was nothing, not even a cell phone tower. It was like stepping back in time. After another particularly hard contraction, the two began to walk again. They both felt the urgency of the situation and were walking at the fastest pace Mary could muster. For a moment, Joseph thought he was hallucinating. After all these miles of nothing, he thought he saw something out in a field. A lot of somethings. Mary saw them too. If there were animals, that meant there were people. Excitedly, they quickened their steps. Another 2 contractions hit before they actually made it to what they had seen. A pasture full of animals. There were acres and acres filled with sheep and cattle. That meant they had to be a farm around. But they still couldn't see it. On they trekked, interrupted periodically by contractions, when finally, hidden just behind a little knoll, they saw the house. They felt like they had just won the lottery. They had found help. Mary bent over with another contraction as Joseph ran ahead to knock on the door. Unfortunately, no one answered. He knocked again. Still no response. He walked across the porch and peered in the window, but it didn't look like anyone was home. He had just spotted the barn up ahead when he heard Mary call out for him. He ran back to her to find that her water had broken. They had taken the Lamaze class together, and he knew this was it. No going back now, and no time to waste. They were not going to make it any further. The baby was going to be born in the middle of nowhere. Joseph helped Mary to her feet, and she hobbled to the house. They debated breaking in, but given she was carrying the Son of God, they thought maybe breaking and entering was a bad start to their parenting career. Joseph ran around the back to see if perhaps there was a patio with some nice cushions he could lay out for her, but this wasn't that type of house. The owner of this house lived simply, and judging by the shape the house was in, they probably didn't do a lot of splurging on something like nice patio, let alone the furniture to go with it. With the resolve every mother that has come before her has known, Mary was determined to deliver this baby safely. The porch provided no shelter, so she would have to make it to the barn. She pushed herself up and shuffled as far as she could before another contraction hit. Joseph sprinted to the barn where he saw a wheelbarrow resting just inside. With the speed of an Olympic track star, he raced the wheelbarrow back to Mary, scooped her up, and rushed her back to the barn. A bumpy wheelbarrow ride definitely wasn't written into their birth plan. There was no warm water bath to soothe the pains of her contractions, no ice chips as needed, no nurses to speak calmly to her as they administered the glorious epidural that would make this a much more pleasant experience. There was no doctor to tell her how dilated she was or when to push. It was just Mary and Joseph. They'd have to figure it out together. In the corner, Joseph piled up a bunch of loose hay and laid his flannel shirt across the top. He picked Mary up and laid her gently in the hay. They both knew that now was the time and that their lives were never going to be the same.